2 more minutes if there are any additional questions. Okay, why don't we thank Pablo again?
Okay, thank you.
And please welcome our next speaker, Pascal Willemsen, who will be presenting for Sabrina Coninx.
Okay, so can you all see that? Okay, good. So yeah, thank you very much. So today I'm going to present joint research with Sabrina Coninx and Kevin Reuter on the foreconcept of pain. And I would like to do 2 things. First of all, I would like to give you some insights into the foreconcept of pain. But on the other hand, I would also like to suggest new ways to actually examine that foreconcept. So let me just tell you a little bit about what research is already out there. So philosophers and experimental philosophers more specifically have discussed various positions on what the foreconcept of pain might be about. So there's one view that argues that, well, it's all about feelings. So the foreconcept of pain is first and foremost about something that we experience. So it's a private and subjective feeling and commonly characterized by an unpleasant and hurtful experience. And that kind of makes sense. If you say that you have a pain, usually you mean that you're feeling something unpleasant. On the other hand, there are also so-called bodily views that argue that, well, the foreconcept of pain treats pain as something public and objective, and it's a bodily state. So it's commonly associated with physical damage, a disruption of the body, or some sort of disturbance. And then, of course, as there always are, there are also pluralistic views that say, well, it's probably both of these things. So it's not just about the feeling and not just about the bodily stuff, but it's basically about both these things. So pluralists argue that there's not a single foreconcept of pain with a distinct univocal meaning, but the foreconcept is actually much more complex. So it includes references to an unpleasant feeling and a disruptive body state. Sometimes, so some philosophers argue at the same time. So the concept is about both these things at the same time, and others argue that it's sometimes about this one thing and sometimes about the other. And what's very nice about these views is it's actually about the foreconcept. So here we have a concept that's not a philosophical or a technical term, but it's supposed to be about what lay people mean when they use the term pain. So experimental philosophers have conducted a few studies on the foreconcept of pain already, and all of these studies were vignette-based. So what these researchers have done is we're trying to disentangle the feeling and the bodily view and to decide who gets things right. They created short stories, presented them to participants, and asked them whether the person in the scenario is experiencing pain or not. And what is crucial about these vignettes, so we believe, is that they try to describe a story where the agent either has this unpleasant experience but no corresponding bodily state, or they have bodily damage but no corresponding negative feeling. And the vignette studies that we have so far provide actually mixed results. So some of them support the feeling view, others support the bodily view, and again, others are taken to speak in favor of a more pluralistic approach. When we actually started our project, we were kind of discontent with the experimental evidence that is already out there. And here are just 2 things you might worry about. So first of all, the perspective that researchers have taken here is a third-person perspective. So you have the story, and as a participant, after reading that story, you are supposed to say whether the agent in that story is experiencing pain or not. But we actually believe that pain reports are much more frequently made from a first-person perspective. So we tell people that we are in pain, or other people tell us, well, I am in pain. So we believe this first-person perspective is worth exploring. Also, a second worry you might have is that these stories try to actually pull two things that usually go together apart. And that could have serious consequences on people's competence in applying the concept. So just think about normal instances of pain. You would always assume that the person has this negative feeling, and at the same time also a bodily disruption. Something is wrong with the person's body. But now pulling these things apart, that might actually do something with people's competence with the term. So we argue that a different approach is needed. Here we argue for a linguistic approach. And what we say is, well, technically, all the people in the debate here can at least agree on one thing. And this is irrespective of whether you're a defender of the feeling view, the bodily view, or pluralistic view, you will believe that if a person utters a first-person pain report, such as, I have a pain in my arm, everyone hearing that statement will make two references. First, the speaker is having an unpleasant feeling, and also there's something physically wrong with a person's body, or at least the speaker believes there to be something wrong with their body. But now the question is, how exactly are these pieces of information communicated? And we argue that the dispute between the bodily view and the feeling view is actually exactly about this question. It's about what is it that that is communicated by semantic entailment, because they want to give a semantic theory of the foreconcept of pain. So technically, these two pieces of information, so bodily information and feeling information, could be communicated as part of the semantic content. They can be presupposed, or they can just be conversationally implicated. And here our aim in the study is to actually find out which of these different pieces of information belongs to the semantic content. So we used 3 experimental linguistic studies in order to find out. So first of all, we used the implication test. And here basically the rationale is just, we have a target sentence, such as, I have a pain in my arm, and we want to understand what it is that people can infer from that statement. And here, when I say infer, I know that people argue that semantically entailed content does not need to be inferred beyond what is literally said. I'm basically just using the term inferred here to say, what is it that people can understand when hearing that statement? And quite intuitively, unrelated information should not be inferred. Semantically and presupposed content should always be inferred. And conversational implicatures should be inferred depending on whether the context fits or not. So here's how we use the rationale of the test for our purpose. So we gave participants the following stimulus. Tom says, I have a pain in my arm. And we told them, from this statement alone and having no further information, what do you infer from this statement? Then we gave them 6 different options. First, there's something physically wrong with Tom's arm. Tom thinks that there's something physically wrong with his arm. Tom feels something unpleasant. Tom has an arm. Tom needs help. And Tom likes flowers. And we predicted that the first 5 will actually be inferred, even though to various degrees, while Tom likes flowers will not be inferred. So here are the results of the implication test. What we can see here is that the unrelated content is not inferred at all. So we get a mean rating of 1.31. The presupposed content that Tom has an arm is highly inferred. So we get, on a 9-point scale, an 8.9. And all the other items in question, so our target items, the 2 body conditions and the feeling condition, get ratings significantly above the neutral midpoint. So we count them as inferred. But you can already see that feeling and bodily items score differently. So we can talk about how to interpret this later. The second thing we were interested in is, given that these things are inferred in a positive condition, so when we say, I do have a pain in my arm, can they also project? And we know that semantic entailed content does not project when we embed the target utterance in an entailment canceling operator. So in this case, in particular, we chose a negation. And we also know that presupposed content will project in these cases. So the projection test actually helped us to determine which of these contents are likely to be semantically entailed and which of them are presupposed. So here's what we did. We just negated the target claim. So instead of saying Tom says, I have a pain in my arm, he now says, I do not have a pain in my arm. And again, we asked participants what they can infer, and they got exactly the same options as before. What we can now see here is, if you look at the orange or reddish bars, that the presupposed content did not change at all. Well, slight changes, but not significantly so. So still highly inferred. And we can see that for all our three target contents, the inferability drops below the neutral midpoint. And that was something that we believed counted strongly in favor of semantic entailment and much less in favor of presupposed content. So then we still haven't quite ruled out that perhaps what we have here is also a conversational implicature. So we also conducted a variation of the more popular cancelability test, namely the deniability test. So what we basically did is we assumed that, well, if a piece of information is just conversationally implicated, then it should be fairly easy to explicitly deny that this is what you meant to say. And of course, for presuppositions and for semantic entailed content, this should not be possible at all. So saying, I have a pain in my arm, but I don't need to say that I have an arm, that's kind of weird. And the same should go for semantically entailed content. So here's what we did. So just to give you two examples, the objective body condition and the conversational implicature. Tom says to Sally, I have a pain in my arm. Sally responds, oh, so you mean that there's something physically wrong with your arm? Tom responds, no, I don't need to say that. My arm is perfectly fine. And the question here is, of course, well, does that sound okay or does it not sound okay? So we asked participants, does Tom contradict himself? And just to give you the contrast, so here, conversational implicature, Tom says to Sally, I have a pain in my arm. Sally responds, oh, so mean that you need help? And Tom responds, no, I don't mean to say that. I can handle the situation on my own. And we believe that the conversational implicature should be fine. If the bodily view is correct, then people should say, no, it doesn't sound fine for the body one condition. And here are the results of that study. As you can see, conversationally implicated content is fairly easy to cancel. So here we just get something pretty close to the lower endpoint of our scale. And you can see that the results look a bit mixed for our target items. So for the feeling content, we get a rating significantly above the neutral midpoint, so indicating that this does sound contradictory. For the body one, the objective body condition, so there is something physically wrong with Tom's arm. We also get a rating that is significantly above the neutral midpoint, but only slightly so. And for the subjective body condition that Tom believes or thinks there's something wrong with his arm, the results are even closer to the midpoint. So here we only get a p-value of 0.07. Okay, so these are the results of our study. So let's wrap things up and take a look at where we stand and what we can say about the core concept of pain. So just to give you the summary here, what we find is that the implication test reveals that the two body conditions and also the feeling condition can be reliably inferred from a first-person pain report. And that shouldn't be surprising to anyone. On the other hand, digging a little bit deeper and trying to disentangle, well, okay, so how exactly is it now communicated? We find that the projection test reveals that the two bodily conditions and the feeling conditions do not project, indicating that they are more likely to be semantically entailed. And we also find in the deniability test that the two body conditions, and again, the subjective body condition gives us a bit reason to discuss, but also the feeling condition cannot be denied. So saying I have a pain in my arm, but denying these implications, that sounds contradictory to participants. So what I think we can conclude is that information regarding both a bodily disruption and also an unpleasant feeling are part of the semantic content of the foreconcept of pain in first-person pain reports. And so it seems that the pluralists, at least for now, this is our conclusion, seem to get things a bit more right than any of the views that only focus on one of these aspects. Of course, there are still some open questions which we would like to discuss in the future. So we're working on a more extended, more theoretical paper. So of course, you might wonder, based on study 1 and 2, what's going on with a bodily condition? Why are both these items, why do they score lower than the feeling view, than the feeling content? And several ideas have already been presented. So Liu, for example, argues that we know that it has a lot to do with how we word things, which result we can get. So we can push people's intuitions around. So we're trying to push people's intuitions now. People might also be thinking about referred pains. So it's nothing wrong, particularly with the arm, even though the feeling might seem to be in the arm, but still the issue is somewhere in, I don't know, the spine, for example. And it might also be that the stimulus, especially for the bodily 2 condition, is just a bit too complex for people to get. We don't quite know. We should also figure out how exactly our studies relate to vignette studies. So as I said, vignette studies just usually give us mixed results. So here we're working on trying to put these pieces of the puzzle together and hopefully one day give you a more complete picture. Thanks again to my co-authors, also our funders, and thank you for attending this talk and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Pascal. We have about 4 minutes for questions.
I have a question in person.
Go for it.
So you kept referring throughout your talk to the folk concept of pain. This seems to assume that there's a unified concept that's shared across the folk, but I could imagine lots of other scenarios. So there could be a graded understanding of pain across people. There could be different clusters of understanding where you have certain sets of beliefs sticking together. So I was wondering, in your own data, when you look at the distribution of responses, do you have reason to believe that folks are in agreement with each other, or do you find variation within your own sample? And then also, how do your results relate to the global folk beyond the particular sample that you're looking at?
Yeah, great question. So I think that there are basically 2 questions. So let me start with the second one first. So we cannot really say how this, how the foreconcept of pain, so whether we have one that is shared by participants of different languages. So language might actually play quite an important role. But also the psychology or also some social stuff might be super relevant for people to decide how they can use this term. So we know that some cultures are more open about pain, have more diverse terms to refer to pain. So maybe something there is different. This is a study that we only conducted in English, and most participants were either from the United States or from the UK. So our data are pretty limited to speak to the core concept of pain in, well, these groups. I think at least when looking at the distribution of our data, it seems that we do not have reason to believe that people are in large disagreement. So when we take a look at the different tests, and especially the implication and the projection tests, they were tested within subjects. So participants first got the implication test and then the projection test. And it didn't seem as if the differences from the first to the second condition, that they differed between subjects. Also, the distribution is pretty normal. So we don't find bimodal distributions, which would also indicate that participants might have more complex or various concepts of pain, but we didn't really find that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, time for one more question. I have a question. I was wondering if your research program, do your interests extend beyond pain to other types of bodily feelings that maybe we wouldn't describe as pain, like being tired or being really energetic or awake or sick or bloated, like this interest in like how much is it about the physical body versus something more subjective, internal?
Great question. So I basically joined this this collaboration more as the person coming up with the tests. So the actual experts on pain are Sabrina and Kevin. So I believe that Sabrina is also interested in emotional pain, which might be interesting because we seem to use a pretty similar language in these cases. So we have not only headaches but also heartaches and all these kinds of things. So I believe there is some research on trying to find out what the difference is between something being itchy, which also seems to be unpleasant. You also can have something with your body being wrong there, but it doesn't seem to be an instance of pain. And we seem to be pretty good at distinguishing what is just itchy and what is painful. But I cannot really tell you what experimental studies are out there. So maybe just post that question again, and Kevin and Sabrina can answer. They might have a much better overview over the literature.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's welcome our last speaker, Daniel Casasanto.